We've heard a lot about authentication too. Obviously, there are consumer identities are under attack all day, every day. What kind of perspectives could each of you bring about what you think some of the best methods are for protecting consumer identities? And it's a free-for-all, whoever wants to talk.
I'll just. All right. You sure?
Just go down the
All
line.
right, fair enough. So in my mind, awareness is the answer. And what I mean by that is sometimes when you're caught between a rock and a hard place, the best thing to do is to go further faster, go forward faster. And so knowing that no matter what we do, from a authentication, verification, whatever layers we put in place, identities are still going to be under attack. The best thing a consumer can do is be as aware of the usage of their identity as possible. And that gives them the tools at that point to at least protect themselves when those attacks do occur. So I would tell you awareness is the one thing that hasn't necessarily been spoken about as much, at least in the sessions I've sat in on.
Okay, so I'm going to go completely opposite of you.
That's actually awesome.
because you know when I go to a conference and somebody says they're going to give you actionable advice on how to protect your identity online, I'm always at the edge of my seat because there's very little that we can do really to protect our identity online, right? So we know that the browsers behave differently. We have different skill sets. You know, my mom has zero clue about what's going on. I get entire emails in the subject line. So we have all of these kind of pieces that we have to deal with in a continually moving threat landscape. So awareness is really good. And trying to not put all of your data into any form that comes your way, and thinking about the value of your data, I think is a really important piece. But what can we do? It's a tough question to answer. That's why we're here. So I think we think at the DIAC what we need to solve for is not only personal identity, but we have to solve for organizational identity as well, and the ability for us to prove relationships between each other. And so it is the Consumer ID World event. What we're putting forward in Canada is that the way that you solve this is by unlocking the capabilities of the government to underpin assertions about us, particular attributes about us, and make that available into the economy for us to use. And then we also have to solve for personal identity, so that's what those attributes are proving. Maybe they're coming from the government, maybe they're coming from a bank. But then we also have to unlock the capabilities of the private sector, and so we have to get the best out of authentication. Banks can pick us out in a crowd digitally because we're doing tons and tons of transactions with them. Governments can't. They have very little idea who we are digitally. Telcos have a much better idea who we are digitally inside of their walls than governments do. So from our view, there's very little that we can do in the current state. We have to be aware. We have to try to squash the vectors that we can. But in order to really solve for this equation, for the identity equation and the safer transacting equation, we have to get governments doing what they do, and which is verifying pieces of identity, and get that into the economy and stop only thinking about me logging into government. And we have to get private sector to be able to consume that information or validate that with that information, but also help governments to authenticate who we are, that we're the same person over and over. So that's a little, what we think in DIAC.
So are you advocating national ID with a smart card?
I love it. It's a great question. Yeah, let's do it. No, we're not. So we're not advocating for a singular national identity. I like to say that identity is an intersection of technology, culture, and governance. How you're Sure, we have a social insurance number. I mean, we have a social security number here as well, right? One might argue passports. I mean, I think only 10% of people in the U.S. have passports. That's a really low number. I don't know the number in Canada, but I know
we
it's
just
quite
sneak
up
across
there.
the border.
Yeah, I know it's high up there though. But the point here is that in terms of a singular identity, so. Are you Canadian? You know you know where it is. So I thought, okay. So you know that, not everybody does.
I know where it is.
So you know that the
200K
legal,
north of here.
the legal root, exactly, good. The legal root of your identity in Canada comes from the province. And the legal, unless you're an immigrant, then it comes from the federal government. So we are a federation of 13 provinces and territories that all agrees to work together under one government. So the federal government doesn't even know who you are until the province tells them. So this idea of a singular identity, number one, Canadians don't want that. They've clearly said that they don't want that. Now maybe culture will change and eventually they'll say, oh, this is a pain in the butt, we'll do it. But the way that the governance works, all of the roots come from 14 different places. So we need to be able to connect in with those roots when you need a high assurance and make that available and enable Canadians to actually use that information. So we're not talking about one singular identity. We're talking about models where people are in the middle. They have data requesters and data verifiers, and they can just make those connections between data requesters and data verifiers. So for us, single identity, no, is not in the cards now.
Thank you. So the topic is really why we start to think about what eventually became a company and Pixio, but very long time ago. That means how do you protect yourself indeed in the digital world that's where you could already see 10 years ago the growing amount of data about yourself going into everywhere, and this is just growing. So we try to think in a sort of radical way. We could always do, okay, put a bigger lock in front of the door and a bigger safe deposit box, etc. But having worked in banks in the past, you know that doesn't work. And as you may know, there's no money in banks anymore. I mean, real money. And there are good reasons for that, because you can always break in. And the matter of fact is that it's happening every single day. So we really look at, since we were a startup at that time, or even not even that, what could we do radically? And that's how we came with the thinking about, it's all about where the data are located, and then how can you access the data? You don't have to, you can't dissociate the fact that you access the data and the fact that you own the data, because the main problem is that when you start to own the data for companies, then you begin to go into bigger and bigger and bigger chest where you have that, and then you have hacking issues. So if we could find a system where you know where the data is accessible, you might check through a query, is it true or not? Is it big or small, or whatever the question is. And then you come back with the answer, and all you store, so to speak, is the answer with sometimes some certification or credential around that answer. Then that should be possible to build something. And that's how we came up with the architecture of our platform. We've also, because GDPR was already in progress 10 years ago, we looked at that, and actually privacy by design from Canada. And so we had that as a threshold. I mean, that was the non-negotiable part of the design of our solution. And I think eventually that's where now as a customer, if I have a way to store my data in a very natural way in a mobile or wherever, where I used to have my data anyway, collect some more, have it completely secure and encrypted in one or several locations, but that I own, with a, as I said earlier, by default, it's an opt-out. That means you don't touch, I don't share. And then I decide with whom I can share, when, and just by the opportunity or the triggering event, as I say, which is when I want to buy something or do. Then I start to have a system where at least my data feels secure. And then I feel that that data doesn't have to move, of not all the data has to move to the person that needs that data to make a transaction with me. And you start to have a system where eventually you feel protected and in control. And that's how you start to rebuild the trust. If companies start to say, well, we take it seriously now, we're not, you know, of course we take seriously customer data, but that's mainly for marketing issue or for compliance issue. But if companies start to treat that as a real asset and respecting the customer, then they will say, okay, I don't need to own your data. I just need to be able to, if you ask me something, to access some of these. And that's it. And So that's why we build up Pixio eventually.
All right, I'm going to keep the theme of debate alive here. Joni, that's a great idea that you guys are getting data from governmental sources, authoritative sources. It's much more meaningful than credit bureau data and that kind of thing. But at the end of the day, it's data. It doesn't prove identity. It proves that somebody knows some information. It doesn't prove that that's the person performing the transaction. So I love where you're going with it, but I still think it has some holes. Now, we personally deal with some very, very sensitive data, probably the most sensitive PII in the world, and that's government-issued IDs and faces. Really important stuff, really sensitive stuff, hackers' panacea, if you will. So we process things in a stateless environment. We don't store that data. Those images come into us, we process them, return a result, return that result to our customer, then destroy. So it's a good way to save and protect the customer. I was just coming off of another telco fraud forum, and another concept that came out of that was tokenization. We've been doing that with credit cards for quite a while. So if somebody steals the database of credit cards, it's meaningless, it's worthless to them. Why can't we apply that concept to PII?
Yeah, I don't think we're very far off, and I'm trying to find a way to fight with you now, since we want to keep that theme going. But I don't think we're that far off. I think we're talking. I think we had some themes here. We're talking, I think, largely about keeping data where it is. I think we're talking about data minimization. I think we're talking about. You had another point that I wanted to pull onto. Well, platforms, environments, yeah. So we're talking about environments that are more secure, that we can do business in. Oh, I think you had zero knowledge proof. Maybe you had a bit of zero knowledge proof, yeah. So I don't need to ask the specific question. I can ask a range and then get a yes or no token. So I think without planning, we got a lot of themes that we all really agreed on there. And then I think in terms of, I agree with you, data is data. It doesn't really mean anything without binding it for physical presence and using, multi-factor authentication and different mechanisms to say, yes, I was actually there and present for this transaction, to be able to give consent to it, and also to... so we can do even more higher and more compelling use cases around healthcare or other things. I guess the one thing that's interesting that I was thinking about when you were giving your talk was, consent is kind of an interesting paradox in protecting consumers, because, if we have to record a consent and prove that a consent event happened and retain that data, you've now created a paradox that that I was there. So I'm curious, how we're going to kind of get out of that box. Protect people and enable people to do that kind of business, to do their business, but also not create this paradox with recording of consent.
And I think, great. I think that's an issue, again, where the same regulators I feel as if who have written the laws on data privacy, on the flip side, have been involved in writing the laws around compliance and the requirements around consent. So I don't know that it's up to certainly the vendors to figure it out. I think the regulators have to come to the accommodation and figure that out for us, because if you look at the laws, there is a paradox. There's an absolute paradox around, if I'm required to collect consent, that means I'm actually, and I have to prove that I collected consent, that means I'm retaining customer data, therefore I'm violating the right to be forgotten. And the process just goes on and on. So, but one thing I want to go back to around the original premise here around protection of the customer, I'm going to keep with the libertarian bent, and I'm going to say it's the customer's requirement to protect themselves. I do believe that people do need to keep an eye out. You should be as aware as possible around your identity. I don't believe there is any way, I personally don't believe there's any way to stop it. Your identity will be stolen most likely at least once in your lifetime. And it's up to you at some level, whether it's credit card or whatever the case may be, to be aware and mitigate. You're not going to necessarily stop it. So it's a personal viewpoint, but you ask and it's answered.
Just to, I'm sorry. those questions?
There was one. I think
Oh,
somebody
go
wanted
ahead.
to
I'm sorry.
attack me.
Are you saying that digital crime is not a part of physical crime?
I did not hear that.
Are you saying that digital crime is not on par with physical crime when somebody breaks into my house and steals stuff so I can call the police? But when my password is stolen from the dark or using some bot, it's not a crime and I can't call anyone.
No, I'm not at all saying it's not a crime. I'm just suggesting that the crime's going to occur. It's more likely to occur that someone is going to steal your passport information online as opposed to breaking in and taking your big screen television. And they're certainly not going to break in and take your passport into your home. They're more likely to break in on the web and take your ID than they are to take any valuable from your house.
I wanted to contradict you a little bit on the fact that there is a way, or there are ways, but there is definitely a way to collect the consent without collecting the data, and also actually put in place systems where it's still possible to have the right to be forgotten. Pretty efficient. That's what we put in place not that long ago for a customer. I mean, now with GDPR, they all have to do it, but a customer in Europe. So there are ways to do it. Just have to be a little bit creative.
I like the idea of trying to protect yourself, but how do I protect myself from Equifax not doing their job? They're collecting information on me. I never gave them consent for that. They're not any value add. I did.
So,
Okay, I stand corrected. Actually, I'm going to sit corrected now.
I mean, it's like cars, right? I mean, so we can take the libertarian view for sure, but as we said, this is outside of our control. We can't control those organizations, and so what is the consumer's role here? Is also maybe another way to think about it. And so when we come to this question, I often think about cars, because just as the internet is magic to my mother, cars are magic to me. I know how to drive them. I have no idea how they work, what's going on underneath. It's magic. The key goes in and it goes. But we do have rules of the road. I can be super libertarian and drive into the ocean. That's a thing that I can do if I want. It would be probably stupid. It would be stupid. But we did have a consumer protection agency where people got together and said, hey, by the way, maybe we should make these cars as safe as they can be. We know that they're going to have accidents, but let's identify how we can design them so that they're not complete death traps. And so we accept that things are going to happen, but we, people in this room and others, have a big responsibility here to make this environment safer, better, still leaving the room that people can, they're going to do stupid things. We're never going to have a perfect system. So I agree with that.
And as consumers this time, we can also vote with our feet. I mean, we can favor companies that take us seriously in terms of data privacy, et cetera, and avoid the others. As an old activist, I've been in the organic movement since, I won't tell you how long. And same thing at the beginning, that was a tiny, tiny little niche, not even a niche. And eventually now you find in any kind of grocery store, you're going to find at least a few products with organic, not even talking about is it good or not, doesn't matter, but that was just pressure and voting by customers saying this is what I want. And I think eventually it will be companies having a wise message to their customers saying, I take it seriously now. And not just because I have to, but because I know this is better for you and by definition for me.
Following up on your Equifax question, I'm a bit of a slow learner. I've been a victim 5 times this year. I had $300,000 worth of cars bought off me in 2 weeks, and I've got a residence in Las Vegas that I've never been to, and all kinds of things. So, it's not easy, and obviously I didn't do anything wrong there, but the answer is credit freeze. If you want to stop yourself from being a victim, just freeze it. Don't let anybody access it.
I need to precede my question with something that's unique about our product that we're introducing. It's a patent-pending product that's a fingerprint product that has an encryption that's unique to the specific fingerprint. And my question about protecting the consumer, it has to do with the concept of hiding the consumer's information behind the encrypted fingerprint on the authenticating server. And my question is, what, if anything, is wrong with that you perceive?
Have to think through that one, but it sounds like a pretty good concept initially.
No biometrics on servers, that's what I say.
That's a good point. That's an awful big debate. FIDO's got a lot of momentum in keeping those biometrics stored centrally, locally, where the consumer owns them. I mean,
Yeah.
there's some momentum there.
That's important.
But, again, I'll just play the contrarian because that feels good today. So, sort of to the point you made earlier around breaking into your home, you can build a wall, you can build a boat, you can elevate your home on stilts, you can do lots of things, and if someone is determined, they can get into your home. We know that. There's no denying that. You can have armed guards 24/7. Guards can be corrupted, and then on and on and on. They can get into your home. Stored on the server is just a fixed place is always a way, you can get in. That's a rule in the military. Fixed in placement, that's just an easy way. It's defined walls. I can break in, dig under, go around, fly over, whatever the case may be. So storing it on your device, I just steal your device. Storing it on some server somewhere, I just have to find that server and get to it. So all I'm saying in that exercise is there's always going to be a way. We're never going to get away from that. What we can do is try to be as aware as possible. So again, it's not going to be foolproof, but being aware is certainly one best defense that you can apply.
I like the more offensive approach than just being aware. For instance, how much data do we just give up just because somebody asks for it? How many people have their birth date on Facebook? Why?
Lots of people.
And if they require a birth date, make one up. Just remember what it was. Yeah, but you put disinformation up there. I mean, think about it. With the only people that need your Social Security number is a revenue agency or a financial institution. Anybody else is asking for that, but require it, make one up. For a phone number, you'll wonder why you get spammed on your cell phone all day long. How many places have you put your phone number? Right? Put a fake phone number up there. Put a birth date that's different than your own birth date. You can't open credit with your social insurance number and a wrong birth date. And that knocks a whole bunch of it out. So just because a website asks for this information, doesn't mean you have to give it up truthfully.
I totally agree with that. And I think the thing is you could have, goodsite.com ask you for that information and nothing happens. You could have stupidsite.com ask you for that information and then suddenly it goes. But people can't tell the difference between goodsite.com and stupidsite.com. So, what we're trying to do is actually get to the root of that issue. Why are you being asked those stupid questions? Why are you being asked for your birthday to be on Facebook? Well, I think, it can answer. Probably for legal reasons. You should be above a certain age to be participating in Facebook. It's to protect their liability and not yours. Well, shouldn't we be able to have a token or a claim that we can pass that says, this is my overage token?
Yes.
Take it, not my birthday, right? So we got to solve that problem. The verified claims, verifiable claims, and ecosystems that are ready to process those claims, and then we can really address what's going on. I agree with you.
So a couple things. First, one of my longtime favorite expressions or sayings is, you can never make anything foolproof, fools are too ingenious. And that's the nature of what we're trying to build as well, is that you do the best you can, and it's going to get circumvented, not just by bad people, but by other people who just happen to do things that nobody ever expected. The whole thing of unintended consequences. But the protection notion, like protecting the home, is an interesting one in that there's really two important aspects to be aware of. The one is the large-scale attacks, which is, I'm going to hit 10 million people, and if 10,000, give me a response, that's way worth my time. And then there's the spear phishing, which is you as a particular entity, business person, whatever, have something of value, and I want to get it from you. So you're not just part of an anonymous unknown of massive people. there's a specific reason. And it's very much the same in with burglaries, let's say, that you've got your general communities and you get the guy or an apartment building, rattle the doors. Can I open the door? Yep, I'm in and out. It's purely opportunistic and it's a low, low bar. And the beauty is you can set yourself apart from that very, very easily. Lock your doors. That's the first step. And well, that's what we consider common sense today. Well, we don't have that same level of common sense yet on the internet, right? That there's some very basic things that people should do that they still don't quite understand. And that's one of them. Lock your doors. The second, though, is that, okay, well, maybe I'm a little more concerned. So I'll put in a security system, right? You've now put yourself a level above. And frankly, if you just have the sign, you've probably put yourself a level above because nobody's going to even bother going there because the risk is high and it's just not worth it when the guy next door has left his door open. And then you got the guy who lives in the mansion. Well, he's the targeted one. He's the one you're going to go after. Well, guess what? That person, if they're smart, will spend even more on protecting themselves because they have to, right? They're not going to be the one that's attacked. It's not as big a risk for them to be attacked in the spam attacks, but it's very likely someone's going to target them in a targeted way. It was a long ramble, and I did have a point, but I guess big part of it is that there are some basic things that can be done by the users with a little bit of better education, and passwords are a great one. I've often been telling people for years, these stupid rules about using special characters or forcing them, I was so thrilled when NIST came up with their new guidelines to say you don't have to do that. But it does make it an easy way to take something you're going to remember and make it just a little different so it's not going to get picked up by the dictionary attacks and so on, and all of a sudden you've lifted yourself out of that mass market space. So some basic education, I think, will really go a long way, including things like, well, what data should I just never give somebody unless I have to, like Social Security, birthdays, and so on. So I was sort of a rant, sorry.
That's a great rant. Thanks, Dave. But the problem, I think, with that rant, too, is what we talked about, is that a lot of this is outside of your mansion. Like, it's not, my data is not in my mansion, it's in your mansion. Yeah. So I got to hope you have a mansion and that you're saving it. But I do need to be aware, and I do need to put the locks in. And so in terms of 2 points I want to make. One, actionable. If you don't have a password vault, please go get a password vault. That's, at least for me personally, just until we get to until FIDO kills the password and something else happens, get a password vault so that people, tell your friends, tell your family, so that they're not repeating passwords over and over again and then don't even know where they have them all when they get broken. I think that's very actionable. And then the second thing is, I almost think we maybe have to get a little bit out of the paradigm of protecting the consumer and more into the paradigm of empowering the consumer. And the reason that I think about that is because, you know, I have conversations with people in government who public good is their first priority, as it should be. It's good. But the way that privacy by design or privacy has been translated is to build a wall around information about me. Let's just build a wall around it. And that means that I can't access that data about me. I can't use that data for transactions or even yes/no tokens, overage tokens. I can't get any of that from governments because the posture has been, no, we have to protect the citizens and build walls around all of it. So if we break that paradigm and we get governments and banks and telcos issuing data minimized claims, then then people can actually decide if they want to share that claim or not, versus the idea of we must protect them, we must build a wall around everything. That's going to solve it. Otherwise, we're just playing whack-a-mole with risks.
So we've just done that here in the U.S., by the way. So we've opened up access to IRS records, government records, birth records. I was just trying to pull it up. I learned about it yesterday in a forum. It's a combination of SSA, IRS, and birth records. So under certain circumstances, you have the ability to provide those attributes, and they can be verified directly from the source. And I'll give you the information in just a moment.
Cool. Any other? Nothing at all.
Just my thought.
Yeah. More questions from the audience? More thoughts from the panel?
I think the audience was part of the panel too, though.
Yeah.
There you go.
What do you see as the role of law enforcement in all this? Because I know like when there's a tax evasion, government goes all the way to Siberia to catch somebody. But when there's a digital crime, and last year I was reading somewhere that cost the economy $6 billion just account takeover attacks, but nobody does anything about it. Like they don't even know, they don't even have the tools to fight these things. So what is government's role? I know you're a libertarian, but
Getting that attribute out.
It's out there. It's out there. So, government, law enforcement in particular, is overstretched. At least here in the U.S., and I would say worldwide, and they're really focused on fighting what they believe to be bigger targets, bigger issues, whether it's again, financial fraud in the billions of dollars or terrorism financing. That's really where the bulk of money has gone. I'm from North Carolina. Clearly, we just had a massive storm, and one of the big news items is the fact that monies were moved from FEMA to ICE to deal with those issues as opposed to keeping FEMA funded so that they could better handle those issues. And that trickles down to local law enforcement. And there's no way local law enforcement can deal with these particular digital crime issues. And from a FICEN perspective, national law enforcement, they're really focused on the big fish. They're not necessarily focused on the small fries.
I just want to add this. They do follow crimes to other countries. You may not see it, but I was just saying they do follow crimes to other countries. It depends on the if it's a critical infrastructure, like you said, the priority. It depends on the priority. If it's a financial institution, a telco, a utility company, it depends on the critical infrastructure, and they do follow crimes to other countries.
And Blair, I suspect how involved is local law enforcement with your $300,000 attack?
I actually did get called by a police department on a Friday, Minnetonka Police Department, so they were actually involved. I wanted to follow up on what I mentioned earlier, Joni. It's called the Economic Growth, Regulatory Relief, and Consumer Protection Act. That is a tongue twister, but it provides real-time name, DOB, and SSN validation and does not require a wet signature. But it's not for everybody. Telcos can't get it. It's name, DOB, and SSN validation.
You get that information.
3 different sources.
Yeah, is there multi-factor authentication that you can get that data?
I don't know enough about it in order to answer that.
We have homework to look at that.
Yeah.
'Cause we've never heard of that. So yeah.
Interesting.
So while the mic's going over, I think the law enforcement, I mean, if you talk about identity of people, that's one vector. If you talk about identity of organizations, that's a real big piece. And now if you talk about verifiable relationships, like am I a director and officer of a corporation? Am I a beneficial owner of a corporation? There's tons of crime that happens in identity that's not personal identity related, and a lot of it is money laundering, and so that's a huge vector that consumers get swept up in and turns up in all sorts of other crime like drug money, real estate fraud. It's massive. So that is a huge vector that needs a lot of attention. And we have to solve for org identity and people identity and then bind those together where we need to.
Great point.
I'm sorry, but just to follow on to that, what we are seeing from our customer base, we've got a pretty global 200 customers around the world. KYB, UBO, those are things that are definitely becoming higher rated as opposed to KYC. Ultimate beneficial ownership is something that we are definitely building towards, at least in our business, because that's what our customers are asking for.
Mine is another question or comment. I would like to introduce an entertainment experience that I had regarding my identity. The day before, on the way from Vancouver to Seattle, I was stopped at the passport control by US DHS and was brought into investigation room, and I was told I was supposed to have stayed in US illegally for 15 years since I entered this country in March 2003. And this is not the end of the story.
I hope not.
When I was traveling towards Orlando in March 2003, I was stopped at passport control by the US DHS and brought into an investigation room. And I was told I was supposed to stay illegally in the States for several years since my earlier entry. And I had my finger scanned at both entry and at the departure. And yet, this time, the day before, when I tried to get into this country, the data of my departure from the US 15 years ago was missing. And at the time, I was very afraid that I could reach this place in time, or possibly I could be kicked out and sent back home. Then I wouldn't have the chance of speaking with you here. But anyway, this taught me about how difficult to totally handle the identity problem. I understand that the database of the US government about the immigration is the most advanced in the world. And I had experienced two hardship, or in retrospect, entertaining hardship. And we have saying, what happened twice shall happen 3 times.
Yeah.
It means I have to be very curious. What will happen to me next time I have to travel to US? And hopefully, the American government will have sorted out before my next trip. And hopefully, the people like you will help solve the problem before I get here next.
Everything comes in threes. You'll be stopped
Thank you.
next time.
Well, and with that, we're at break time, so thank you to the panel. Be back at 4 o'clock, please.